taking a moment out from my busy schedule to sit down with some taquitos and a sota because apparently vlogging and lunching really works well together. So you guys get to hear like all the smacking and all the deliciousness that goes into me eating. It's a fantastic way of, expressing my inner self through taquitos. Oh, okay, I'm going to take a bite now. Okay, so anyways, today I decided to go upon the subject of Pink Floyd The Wall, which has been something very deep and very personal for me, actually. Let me go back to when I was a kid listening to this. My mom used to love everything related to Pink Floyd. I mean, she was a Pink Floyd addict, so it would naturally come on to me like a generation later that I would also become a diehard Floydian. But The Wall is a very special CD. Part of the reason why that is because I just look at it as being, personally for me, the greatest rock opera ever created. It has so much energy, and it has such a beautiful story to tell. This is why I personally think that the movie fails in comparison to just listening to the original CD. I had the whole CD memorized in my mind, and the story of The Wall can be different depending on who you're asking. When I initially listened to it, obviously there's a lot of songs about getting high, and obviously a lot of it is relating to this one character, this fictitious character going through a bad trip, and that's where the songs are basically coming from. But for me, there's that personal layer. You bring your own experience into The Wall, which is part of what makes it unique. It forms, just like all great music, into your lifestyle, and it changes as time goes on. As opposed to watching the film, which basically you're only seeing one perspective. It's very hard. Oh, excuse me, I belched a little bit there. It's very hard to place yourself within the film. Or at least for me it is. It's very difficult to relate to the character that's on screen, which is why I would recommend, instead of watching the film adaptation, listen to the CDs several times, or just listen to that first before jumping into the film. Because if you were to go straight into The Wall, the motion picture, I think you might get more of a negative vibe of the whole Wall experience in general. But when I was younger in LA, this is part of the reason why, I get so moved by this particular CD. My dad was in the hospital. He had cancer at the time. And I would listen to The Wall while sitting in his hospital room, believe it or not. I had a little CD player, and I would listen to The Wall all the way through, from front to back. We had to rent this little apartment that smelt like, God knows, it was just a terrible, terrible living condition to have to live out in LA, which is hell on earth for me. And I would just walk around the streets listening to this CD. I would sit in our little apartment that we had rented listening to the CD. And actually, for all intents and purposes, the apartment wasn't all that bad. I think I'm making it out to be much worse than it actually was. Considering the fact that we were in the middle of LA, it actually was very nice. It didn't feel like home. I was in a foreign environment. I was going through a lot of emotional turmoil at this point because I had to pretty much accept the fact that, my dad was mortal. He didn't die because of all this, but he did definitely go through a sickness, and he conquered over it. And it's something that has come back over my life as well. We've had a lot of points, a lot of false alarms where we thought that the cancer might have come back. But now, whenever I hear that CD, it brings back memories of that time, the sort of melancholy, the sort of deep, sort of sad funk that I was in. Particularly the trial, which for me applies to just about any point in my life where I felt like I had hit rock bottom. Whether it's overcoming a situation that put a particular amount of pressure on me, or whether it was just, coping with the everyday problems of life. The song where it goes, crazy, bars in the window, I am crazy, surely gone fishing. where he's being put into he's in this mental state where he's basically putting himself on trial, and all of the memories of his life are coming back to him, all this evidence that is basically pointing to the fact that he is a corrupt individual, and having to realize that in order to overcome this, he has to tear down his own emotional walls and start over. Basically a reset. You don't get into CDs very often where there's a real story arc to it. A real narrative that you can pinpoint. While a lot of it is left up to interpretation, it's still a really excellent story. It's personally for me about as perfect of a story arc as you can possibly get. You start off at childhood, showing the innocence, but showing where the anger begins. Then you end up going later on in the CD where he becomes more corrupt. That's when you get songs like Young Lust, where he's singing about basically wanting to bang a bunch of women, and into his drug addiction. As he grows in power and basically becomes this superstar, he becomes more and more corrupt until finally he realizes what a terrible individual he's actually become, and he confronts himself. That's one of the most universal sort of stories in, literature in general. I love that kind of stuff. Crawling back from rock bottom. Those are always the sorts of stories that I identify with. Also the music. The music is just absolutely 100%, even without the narrative. It's gorgeous stuff. Absolutely gorgeous. Comfortably numb. People always associate Pink Floyd with this kind of or at least people I've talked to, they're like, oh, you really have to be stoned to really understand that music. No, for me, I relate with the emotions that are conveyed through the music. There's such a classical sort of feel to it, even though it's more progressive rock. It's got sort of a Mozart, Beethoven sort of thing with it. I mean, I listen to Comfortably Numb. I think that's a classically orchestrated piece of music. Sure, there's electric guitars, and it's definitely, it's not like a little soft piano piece, but it does what Beethoven, what all of those great artists did in their particular generation. I think Roger Waters is going to be looked back upon as being a fantastic musician. Anyways, this is just one of those cases where if you haven't listened to The Wall yet, you should definitely give it a look. At the very least, if you even like music, just give it a shot. I'm going to link up two of my favorite songs from the CD to this particular video so that you guys can check them out. And, listen to the separate songs, see if you like it, and then I would suggest just going from the beginning of the CD all the way to the end, the entire album. Because once you do that, I think you'll begin to see the connections that I'm talking about here. Alrighty, so I'll just leave it at that. I'm not in the greatest of moods right now, so toodles.